And so before we get the whole Q&A going, I want to run with quick housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded and it will be shared on the Center for Ideas and Society's Vimeo channel. The closed captioning is available, so you may enable that. And you can also interact with us by sharing your questions via the Q&A feature so that we could monitor that and answer any questions coming up. So to enjoy the webinar, which is titled How Do Media Hits Impact Your Career at UCR and Outside of UCR, we have incredible panelists that I'm introducing to you by alphabetical order. First, we have Shaun Bowler, our Graduate Division Dean, Kate Sweeny, the Professor of Psychology, and Teresa and Byron Pollitt Endowed Term Chair, Daryle Williams, our College of Humanities and Social Sciences Dean, and Rachel Wu, Associate Professor of Psychology. Just for time saving purposes, because an hour is really never enough, we can email you links to their bios. They're incredible. They have a lot of media experience, but obviously a lot of experience leading teams as well here. So keeping with the webinar topic in mind, how do media hits impact your career at UCR and outside of UCR? And for faculty in particular, when it comes to annual reviews, from what we understand, media interviews, podcasts, blogs can all be added to a section called Creative Activities, which includes a category called Multidiscipline and Interdisciplinary. I hope everybody's taking advantage of that. Op-eds or opinion pieces can be included in the publications category of a tenure track review process. And with that being said, I would like to first get the Q&A going by asking our deans, Daryle and Shaun, how do media hits impact a faculty member's career at UCR? How does it help the tenure track? So if you can discuss where exactly, how it helps them, and then maybe in academic reviews, how should faculty members document their media presence?
Oh, I'm going to defer to Daryle first because he's got most direct line responsibility for this right now.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Sandra. Thanks for this invitation. You can hear me okay, Rice? I'm in a hotel right now, hotel lobby. Great. Well, I think that we should look at this in two different ways. One is intentionally how a faculty member would like or envisions media to be part of their research agenda. So do they use media, social media, media hits as part of the creation, dissemination of their research? Is that intentional? Then how well they do that, just like we look at many other forms of research activity. The other part, of course, is with the reception of the work and how that reception plays out in various media ways, some of which the faculty member may not be able to be as intentional or engage or controlling, as it were. But I think both of them are important ways to understand how media is in dialogue with a researcher's research, scholarship, creative activity, and then the reception and assessment of that. Of course, different audiences, different means of circulation, and different forms of impact, different languages that might be used. But again, I think this is an important way to think about that. It's this intentional part, though, on the part of the researcher that I think we can begin in this conversation, particularly as we kind of translate that into how the promotion and tenure vehicle, the CV, and what's called eFile Plus for those of us who work at that, represent and categorize these things. Just as much so as a faculty member can put that into a synthetic form in the self-statement that narrates, contextualizes, asserts a certain kind of significance for those kinds of activities and those kinds of receptions relative to the other forms of their scholarly activity.
Thank you, Daryle. Shaun?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm gonna agree with that, Daryle, and basically just repeat some of what he said in a different way. Media, I mean, I'm going to distinguish between, make a different distinction between sort of social media and sort of regular, like the newspapers, radio, TV, sorts of website stuff. That kind of thing is valuable and important. Often it's more important to deans and administrators like me than it is to the academic community. And so it has kind of a small and indirect but positive effect on one's academic career, because it's seen, you know, by the review process as, yes, you're outreaching to the public. That's an important part of our mission as a university, and for our disciplines, that's really important. And so that's valuable in itself. Although, of course, you know, the main business remains publishing in sort of more standard academic venues for the most part. The other bit of it is the social media presence, which is new and something newish anyway, and something that's less certain, I think. Again, it's small and positive in that social media presence. I mean, lots of scholars I know, for example, have very active Twitter campaigns and Twitter followers of, I think it's more important in Europe than here maybe, but they have Twitter follows in the 20 or 30,000 range as they sort of reach out to people. And that's an important means of amplifying one's research. And I think it illustrates the way in which both social media and media have an indirect positive effect on one's career, which is this, is that these days we have a hard time cutting through. We have a hard time getting our research read and noticed by others. There are so many journals, people are so busy, there are so many outlets. In which case, it's not obvious that we can publish something and then just sit back and wait for somebody to find it, so to speak. Having a big, active social media presence or a presence in the media are ways in which we can get our work read and noticed by other scholars in the field. And that's important in that way. And that's why I'm saying it's indirect. I mean, one won't get tenure or a promotion on the basis, for example, of being in the press enterprise every week for a year, or even being on NBC News every week for a year. I don't know, but having your work and reputation achieve it, be noticed by this wider audience, will get your work taken up and noticed, and that'll be helpful.
That's great. That's great, Shaun. Thank you for that. And maybe that's a great segue for maybe Kate, if you can share and maybe how you started, you know, to share your research with our team, our news team here on campus, but also with media outlets, and which, if you can just speak on why should you or faculty members, and you in particular, share your knowledge with the general public?
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, sure. Sorry for everyone, to everyone for my voice. By the way, I talked a lot this weekend, so it's a little scratchy, but yeah, I've been interfacing with the media, you know, on and off, at least since even graduate school. So in my doctoral program, I was at the University of Florida. We had a pretty active media team, I guess, on campus there. And so even with my master's thesis and my dissertation, they wrote up a press release, and I did a little bit of talking to reporters. I think I might have been on the radio at one point, which was very exciting at that point, even back then. And so I had kind of an early exposure to the idea that this is good and fun and something worth doing. And then certainly when I got to UCR, I've been, you know, incredibly benefited by and impressed by the media team here. And so I've been here 15 years, and really continuously throughout that time, I've taken opportunities to talk to various types of reporters. In more recent years, as my work has gotten a little more visible, I've done more of that in general, but also specifically going on things like podcasts or the radio. I've done very little, vanishingly little television, so I won't be a good person to answer those questions. But and even writing op-eds, I haven't done a ton of that, but I think 3 or 4 op-eds. And I'm now working on a book proposal that's meant for kind of the general public. And so you know, I can certainly answer specific questions along the way here, but I'll just say very briefly that, you know, it's not a huge difficult decision for me to talk to the media. I, generally speaking, find it really enjoyable. I just had an interview with a reporter a few days ago that just like a fun 45-minute interview with a really smart person who was interested about my research. And like, we love talking about our research or ourselves. It's really fun to talk to someone who has a different perspective and can ask questions that are very different from the kinds that you get in academic talks and at conferences. So I've really enjoyed it. And I think kind of committing to that has gotten me to this place where now I'm interested in writing this book for the public, because it sort of has trained me how to think in terms of like how to translate my research for people who maybe haven't been psychology nerds in my case for 20 years. So I've had a really positive experience.
Well, thank you for that. I think that that's always, you said it perfectly, that really is always the intention, is taking this world that you've been for the past 15, 20, 30 years, right? And writing about it so that the general public can understand the importance, the impact of that research and why it matters, right? In our community, in the state, in the country, and, just to the world. And so I think that's, I guess I'm biased because I work here at in the news team, but really the intention is really always to help you disseminate that knowledge, all those hours that you've spent becoming an expert in that area. That really is our intention, to help. And people like you and Shaun and Daryle and Rachel make it so easy because your research is so incredibly fun and interesting. But with that, Rachel, can you maybe talk about the impact that media exposure has had on your career? You are expert on learning and how babies learn and how adults learn, and so it's really interesting. So if you can address that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I was one of those people that was always afraid to talk to reporters and things like that and not get involved with media because of, just like horror stories I've heard from other people. So I started small and I talked to like a couple and then like made sure I wasn't misquoted and stuff like that. But I've found it very, very rewarding, and I'll tell you why. So when you're on tenure track, so for all the junior faculty out there, when you're on tenure track, there are things you do for your e-file, for your letter writers, for your department, for the research field, for yourself, and for the public and society. And there are some things that overlap, and there's some things that don't overlap. So for me, I wanted to do this for society, but also it helps your e-file and like what other people have said so far, and also help like me personally too. So for the longest time, my parents like just they refused to like understand what my research was about. And they were like, do you have patience? And I'm like still like till like about 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And so I wrote this op-ed and I like emailed it to them. And I'm like, here, read this. And then, let me know. And I like, Google translated it to Chinese because I didn't know how to actually do anything in Chinese. So, and then afterwards I'm like, oh, so you don't have patience, you have like participants. And I was like, yes. And so then we got, conversation started that way. So for me personally, it's been huge for my parents to be able to understand what I do. But in general, anybody who doesn't have access to papers or has no patience to read your papers or whatever, or just, the understanding of like, the jargon and everything in there, it's such an easy way to communicate because you can just be like, here, read this. So like my in-laws who live in Germany, they were passing it around to their friends too. And that's not something that you would typically be able to do. And, program officers, even colleagues, I've found have read it because it doesn't take much brain power to read an op-ed. And, like new moms or like, people just have like no brain power left if you have like you're living on no sleep. And so that's, it's just a side benefit that that you might not know about. And then people outside the research areas are often, ones in positions to make decisions about awards and grants. And so, that might get you some leads that way. And then it turns out like a lot of TV stations when they're or like people, looking for new TV shows to make or whatever, they just Google for stuff. And so whatever comes up, they'll just like try to contact those people. And so if a lot of people are Googling the same thing and, the algorithms bring it up, then they'll just contact you. So that's how apparently I was contacted by BBC, who did this whole filming about like, this whole series on aging, and it's going to come out sometime this year. And they were like, I was like, how'd you find out? They're like, oh yeah, I Googled and found your op-ed. And I was like, really? that was the only way they had, found me. So, and then same thing, like somebody who just published a book on, he was learning how to learn a lot of new skills and stuff like that. And so he, cited one of my studies, and I think he just found me from Googling as well. So tons of people are just like randomly Googling, and then, they'll usually come up with something that you might write. And you're much less likely to get misquoted if you're writing your own op-ed, right? So that I wanted to do more of that because I didn't want to get misquoted as much. And it's also made me a better teacher and a better communicator as well, because I speak much more clearly, I think. Now, maybe, I don't know, you guys can be the judge of that. But yeah, and I also see it as a final step in dissemination now, as opposed to before I thought it was like a cherry on top, but it's actually like it's a finishing, bow you put on a package now. So.
Right. I see it as an integral part, right,
Yeah,
of this
exactly.
whole thing, because I had a conversation a long time ago with a professor, and her question was, well, why do I want to be in the media? Who cares about it? And my question to her was, well, how many experts are in your field, do you think? Just in the US, she said, about 200. And so if we just think about that, are you telling me that you've spent the past 20 something years doing research and becoming an expert so that 200 people read your book and your research? Or do we want to expand that? And I don't have the answer. I think each faculty member or each graduate student should decide on their own, right? But of course, I'm on the news side, and so I want the world to know. I don't want just 200 people to keep that information contained, right?
Yeah,
so I think that's exactly.
Yeah, you get so much, taxpayer money from the UC system, from grants. We have a obligation to be able to tell them what we're doing, right? So it may be a numbers thing where like the more people in society that are non-experts that know, the better. Because of taxpayer money and stuff like that. But also, like, just the fact that my parents now know what I do was enough for me, based on all the effort that I had put in. So there's like the types of people that might know or might, benefit from it. And then, the bigger society as well.
That's always my goal. If parents and educators, young people understand what you do, and they can have educated conversations, and therefore in the future, educated, I don't know, to be educated about voting, about eating, about whatever that may be. I mean, how much better are we as a society? So the next question I want all of you to answer, if you can take, because obviously Shaun and Daryle are deans, but they're also experts in their own area. And so if you can all answer, if you believe that your intentional focus on establishing a presence in news media has helped your career. And can you cite an example? Maybe we can start with Daryle and Shaun.
Sure. So I'll just maybe build on what Rachel shared with us. Engagement with the media is really part of a larger continuum of research communication. And the amount of words, or this maybe fewer, or the scope of the circulation may be broader, but it's part of research communication, which is something essential that every researcher needs to do. If the research is great, but it can't be communicated to other people, it's not really that it's significant. And so if we think about whether you're communicating to a very small number of experts through a very structured disciplinary vehicle, or op-ed or a tweet, it is part of research communication. So the core ideas and the problems and the methods should be underlying all of that, and then the broader ways, like these are strategies to get that out there. In terms of your question, I particularly began really with Twitter, in part from a book that I had published, which was about Rio de Janeiro, and that was in 2016. It was the year of the Olympics, and so I developed a year-long Twitter campaign, which had a hashtag Rio Reader. And every day I had some element, some tweet about the city of Rio de Janeiro, historical, contemporary, arts, culture, politics, various things there. But for me, it first of all, sort of built up some engagement with the book itself, which was published at the same time, and then it brought that book into the conversation about the Olympics, which happened to be taking place at Rio. But it also was a way about trying to use a social media platform as a way to introduce and amplify primary sources and scholarship around primary sources, which was what this book was about, in ways that were resonant across academic, popular, current events, and even sometimes with sports, audiences, that again still went back though to the expertise, the linguistic expertise, the research expertise, my familiarity with archives, my familiarity with what was taking place in the, global and local conversations about the city, that I was able to present as an expert who was also living and enjoying the moment, as many of us were as well. So I found that to be a really gratifying, but also sometimes tiring. Putting out one tweet a day about one particular topic sounds great until you get to the middle of March, and then you run out of topics, but you still got to go to tweets. And so I did find sometimes it was like actual work, anxiety work, to find a new topic or to find something else that I could have that would fit within an agenda that I'd laid out at the beginning of the year and carried through the end of the Olympics, which were at the end of the summer.
Yeah. I'm not sure I've got much to add. Can you repeat the question, Sandra, so I can see if I've got a better answer than the first one I've come up with?
Yes, and thank you for that one, that answer, Daryle, and sharing. Shaun, the question is, do you believe your intentional focus on establishing presence in media has helped your career? And can you cite an example?
Yeah, that's what it was. I don't have a better answer than the first one I came up with. I'm sorry, so I've got a bad answer. Yeah, I've got a specific answer. I did some work years ago on the idea that it was a team of us on the idea that the importance of democracy is how losers accept the loss, and that's an important idea to democracy. Which nobody cared about until Donald Trump came along, and then suddenly it seemed to be a far more interesting and relevant problem than was before. So that helped, I think. But I think what I'm coming to is, does it help or not? And I think, yeah, and for some of the reasons, for example, that both Rachel and Kate mentioned. So, I sort of part of me is with Daryle. It's about anchoring your work and finding a platform for the work and speaking to a broader audience and getting attention to that, which is important in an academic sense. And so, a big part of me is with Daryle on this one. But the things that Rachel and Kate are saying that resonate with me was the idea that it's kind of fun to do this. And it's fun to do this, and it's fun when your family go, hey, was that you in the, all right, I'll go with the standard academic talking points, New York Times or NPR. It's like, was that you on New York Times or the NPR? How fantastic is that? Because for the world's best job that we have, professors have the world's best job, no question. So it's a fantastic job. Sometimes it gets kind of grumpy and a grind, which is just odd. Sometimes it seems, and discovering these moments of joy and fun, and it's like, oh yeah, this really excited me about this idea, are important. And I think then for me, the thing about talking to the media is this idea that, oh yeah, somebody other than these 200 people, Sandra, that you mentioned, might be interested in what I'm talking about, and some of those might be my relatives, and some of those might be my friends. Some of those might be those kids in high school. Ha, take that, kids in high school. I'm in the New York Times. So some of rediscovering the joy of what we do is important. And I think that's important for kind of keeping the flame of scholarship and keeping the flame of learning alive. And I really like that about it. So yes, to Daryle, I think I'm agreeing completely with Daryle here about how that works and how it unfolds and the value of it. I do agree. And that's the main point, I think. But there are these other ancillary takeaways that I think are valuable, because now I'm thinking, oh, maybe it wasn't just a stupid idea thinking about how losers reconcile themselves to their loss. Maybe I'll do something else on that.
And you hit the nail on the head on that one, right? So that was great, Shaun. Rachel.
Yeah, I know. The one time I've been right. I mean, that's it.
Me next? Okay. 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 So in general, I mean, this is the theme that Dean Williams and Dean Bowler have talked about. Like, it creates conversations that might not have happened otherwise, right? And so these conversations, for me, have been with like TV shows or like, NPR or whatever, New York Times, whatever. But but also, with families, family members and friends and, grant agencies and stuff like that. So I think for me in general, it's just creating opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. And so for other people, then, it will probably be able to do the same thing, especially if you're writing op-eds and you're writing in your own words, as opposed to, just getting interviewed by people.
Good. And speaking of, this is the first of 4 webinars specifically of media. So I'm glad you said that, because we will have, and we will be offering other sessions that speak about how to prepare for interviews, how to write op-eds, how to deal with trolls, all these questions that come with, just having this media exposure. And so thank you for that. And thank you, Rachel, for always participating. We have one question from John.
Here I am. What to your point that you were making earlier, Sandra, about there's 200 experts in your field, and becoming that person through your media interactions, through your stories with UCR, you become the person who shows up in the Google searches. You become the person who's known for that. You become the person who's in the virtual Rolodex for the reporter. And so now what we find after years of being in the media, Rachel shows up out of the blue. She gets calls all the time, I think, about learning subjects, including learning in old age. If there's a story about waiting and about worry and waiting, Kate's going to get the phone call. She's the go-to. There are other people doing this kind of research, but they've had a good media presence. And so they're the ones who are going to get those media phone calls. My question was to one of the benefits of having a media presence is that you attract the attention of other researchers, and it can lead to collaborations. It can certainly lead to your citations are going to get a bounce. Also, granting agencies are paying attention, if only because it fulfills their public outreach requirements. But to the point of attracting the attention of other researchers, anecdotally, and I'll ask this of everybody because everybody here's had a good media presence, to the point of attracting the attention of other researchers, anecdotally, when you're in major media, do you hear from your peers at UCR and beyond? Kate, do you want to?
Yeah, for sure. Exactly as I think Rachel said earlier, we are all capable, well, many of us are capable of reading each other's work, and yet it doesn't mean we always want to do that in our free time. And so certainly it's the case that, if I see someone's name pop up, in a New York Times hit or whatever, I'm going to read that. And others of my colleagues have done the same. I think the most fun is the person who texts you from, across the country from your former life, and is like, oh my gosh, I just heard you on the radio as I was driving into work. That's maybe my favorite way of kind of catching people, but often those texts are coming from people in my field who probably, again, could have read my paper, but probably won't. So yeah, I've certainly had that experience.
Rachel?
Yeah, same. I'll just call him out. So Eddie Zaga, who's in my department, he was just driving to work. He's calling me. He's like, were you in NPR? Was that you? And I was like, yeah, that was me. And so he was just so excited for me. And he we talked about collaborating, but we never did. And it just started, more conversations about that, and yeah, I've had, it's kind of interesting to know in my, colleague circles, who listens to NPR, who reads New York Times versus, so it's fun to, have the stats, but yeah, you just get calls from people going, oh, that was you, that was cool. And then when I, read, stuff with Kate's name or Sonia's name in it, I'm like, oh, that's them. And I text them oh, I just saw you in this. So I don't know. It's fun. I don't know. It's or if I see something that doesn't have their name in it, I'm like, why is your name not in this? So.
It's a fun thing to get a high fives when you walk around campus, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Sandra, I'll get out of the way.
No, that's also fine. I guess that we do have some questions in the chat, but before we take those questions from the webinar participants, for all of you, are there any last thoughts you want to share regarding the research and the intersection with media?
I guess one last thought for me is what I'm trying to concentrate on now more is the more women scientists we have and minority scientists we have, having op-eds and just like the presence in the media, then it changes the next generation of how it looks to the next generation of people that will be in these professions. So I think that's my next biggest thing to try to tackle.
Thank you. That's so important. And just another plug for our news team. That's actually one of the things we really try to do, is try to push as much as we can to ethnic media as well, because that's also important, right? When our researchers or New York Times and Washington Post, or or Ideal, BBC, but locally your research matters to all different demographics and communities. So that's also part of the work that we try here to do.
Can I add just a few quick things? Yeah. So really everyone else beautifully address the kinds of benefits that I've seen to my career. So I don't have a lot to add to that, except just two quick things. One is, and others have alluded to this, but it is absolutely the case that talking to non-experts, which in this case means reporters, has made my work better. Like there are points I can see looking back now where I pivoted in ways that have been very exciting and beneficial and kind of kept things fresh and fun, that came from, a random reporter at some, newspaper just asking kind of an insightful question in a different way. And so that's been one really big benefit that I have seen. The other thing I want to mention, and I don't know, I have no idea who's on this webinar, so I don't know kind of where people are in their careers. But when I was first a new professor, I was really focused inevitably on getting tenure and kind of how these sorts of things might benefit me and how fun they might be. But the longer I've been here, I'm in my 15th year at UCR. I'm now an associate dean in the graduate division with Shaun. The passion I have for this campus and for what we do here has really grown and grown. And so more and more, but really for a long time now, another big part of my commitment to being kind of outward facing with my career has been bringing attention to the campus as, what little part I can do for that. And, my parents sort of anecdotally have commented that in the time, this last 15 years, not because I came, but in the last, 10 or 15 years, they've really gone from hearing very little about UCR on NPR in the newspaper to seeing our name a lot. And that really makes me happy and has some, more distal benefits for my career as well. But really a lot of it is just bringing attention to this campus that I think is not as visible as it could be and should be.
Yeah,
Totally agree there. Thank you.
Can I just agree again with Rachel and Kate? I mean, my participation here is going to be I agree with everybody else. I spent a lot of time agreeing with Daryle, and I'm going to agree with Rachel and Kate, which is from my current role of being in grad division, it's exactly what Rachel and Kate said, which is that by being in the media, we collectively raise the research profile of the campus, and that appeals to grad students and who we're going to bring in. And I think in general, I think that's super important. And which just puts a point on Rachel's, the comment made about it's also important that there are different demographics seen in and here that have their voice expressed in that to show that. And so that's important.
Let me comment on that. One of the things which I really appreciate about what Rachel just did is she intentionally made the point of intentionally making the point about women scientists. And this is one of the ways in which a researcher in research communication, in this case engaging with the media, can literally drive an agenda or like influence what the agenda of the conversation is looking like. So in this particular case, she's both talking about the importance of having diverse representative research voices, and more specifically about women researchers as scientists, and the changes in the nature of what we think science is, what scientists have been, where they're going there. And she's also I would imagine she's also talking about some content area of science that is not specifically gendered in the specifics, but then it does become gendered in an explicit way. So this is where I think that we can communicate here the intentionality of a researcher to plant your argument. It's not just your agenda, your argument into a public sphere, or maybe it's a disciplinary sphere. This isn't necessarily, when we think about social media or media in general, the number of readers may be bigger than an academic conference, but it may not be a large number of readers. And they may be already be predisposed to be looking for this kind of information in any event. But to to set the agenda, to set the conversations, the parameters of what is important to the researcher, important to the discipline in the field, and then it becomes important for those people who are listening to respond to. In this case, I think it's a wonderful example, the importance of having women scientists doing science.
I think that's beautifully said, Daryle, and really, again, for our news team, that's really the driver of what we do. That's our intention, is to just keep conversations going that are driven by our researchers, because you do incredible research. You are incredibly knowledgeable in certain areas that we feel your knowledge, your expertise, your research, your data, all that can contribute to that conversation, can be a turning point. And so that's exactly what we do, why we do what we do, for sure. Anybody else want to add a last minute thought before we take those questions from the audience? We do have several. Good. Okay. Let me take one of the first questions that we do have, so that we can answer. What challenges have you faced in conveying your research to a lay audience, and how did you overcome them?
I can start with one quick one, which is I like most scientists, and probably like most academics, was really, really hesitant early on to go anywhere close to beyond my data. So like, I did not want to ever say something that might be construed as going beyond the really hard evidence that I had from my studies. And I had a Wall Street Journal, reporter, I think once, really incredible person, at one point kind of stop me and say, okay, as an expert though, what can you share with me? And that really was like kind of life-changing in terms of my engagement with the media, because it reminded me that like, it's good to be clear when I'm speaking about data and when I'm speaking as an expert, but like, John mentioned my area is waiting and worry. Like in that field, I'm one of very few people who know a lot about that topic. And so even if I don't have data, I might be able to say, probably this is what happens. So for me, that was one challenge I had to overcome, and I've gotten better at it, but it took some practice.
Anybody else? Shaun?
Gosh, it depends who you're talking to, I think, about making it intelligible for an audience. Yes, it depends who you're talking to. So, for example, who do I talk to? Mostly, I talk to people on the radio people or newspaper people, and they record it and edit what you said. So that's super helpful. As those of you who know me, no, I'm not, I have a peculiar speaking style. I get long-winded, I go roundabout way, I have faults, stops and starts. And so I'm not the polished, smooth presenter, at least. That may come as a surprise to many of you, I don't know. But when you talk to the media people, they're often, first, they're smart, and second, they'll ask questions which guide you through to making it intelligible. That is, if you haven't worked with John and Sandra, who've done a lot of that for you anyway. So we've got these in-house people who will guide you what it is you want to say and how you say it. But generally, the people in the media, unless it's live TV or something, will actually help you frame it in a way that makes it sort of makes it clearer, pithier. If that, but there is, yeah, and I noticed, I think it was Tanya in the quotes who go, well, how do you boil it down? It's like, yeah, that's kind of part of what you have to do anyway, and that's come up in some of the comments so far, which is that, yeah, it's our job as communicators. We can't just to communicate to the 200 people. Actually, 200? I mean, I'm thinking 20 in my field. I mean, we can't just communicate to the 20 to 200 academics who are interested in what I'm interested in. And so even if it takes more effort than what I'm saying, so even if we can't be guided into intelligibility through John or Sandra or whoever the radio host is who's editing your comments, and if we can't do that, it is a skill that's useful to learn. That's the thing. It can be acquired and learned, and that's a good and fun thing too.
Yeah, I agree. It does, and there's also this really between the time we communicate, there's this thing of trust that you gain, right, between the writer and the faculty members. So that trust that as the writer, I'm understanding your research. And then I'm also trusting that when I ask a question that we have this conversation so that we can get to a point of understanding this is your research and we are disseminating the information, maybe not in the same words that you write a research paper in, but in a form that I don't want to say simplified because that might have a negative connotation. It's not simplified, but it is put in a way that everybody can understand the impact of that research that you have, that you've worked on for years, for decades, right? And so that might be where we get. So thank you, Shaun and Kate. We have another question. Basically, we have, do you differentiate the studies for media engagement, perhaps avoiding the complicated ones? Or do you think all the studies, no matter how complicated, can be presented in the media and be understood properly? That might be a question, I don't know, for John. Do you want to try to answer that? Do we think that no matter how complicated the research is, some research findings are complicated and are nuisance, and that's also true, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to find here. I did type I typed an answer in the email, and so basically in the chat field. But it's a conversation. We obviously don't write. Media relations doesn't write about every publication in a journal. Even among some of our folks who have the highest, biggest media presence, we're maybe writing about 1 out of every 3 or 5 or 7 papers that they publish. So the litmus test is, will it be of interest to the media and a general audience? Is it directly relatable to something, practical? That does it have a practical application? And so that's a lot of the research that's done is very valuable, but it's valuable for discussion within your discipline and within your peers, and to forwarding your this research topic to the next level, but maybe not so relatable to the general public. So that's what the lens that we look through when we're considering it.
Yep. Absolutely. We also have op-eds are pretty popular here in the Q&A. A couple of people are asking about op-ed writing. So if a few of you can talk about your experience in writing an op-ed, what the process has been, and then definitely something that our office can support you with. And we will have one of these webinars will be specifically dedicated to op-ed writing. There's a strategy, there's a format, there's a way to pitch. And so we would love to help you with that. And hopefully you can participate in that. But for those of you who have written op-eds, can you speak on your experience with writing one?
Sure. Yeah, I can go first. It was hard at first, but then easier as it got, as the process went on. And then it was much easier the second time. You kind of have to just talk like you're writing an undergrad paper, maybe. I don't know if that's the best way to put it. And then and you send, you can send anything with like a ton of jargon, whatever, to John's office, and then it'll come back, really polished, and then you might correct some things in there, whatever, factual, whatever, and then send it back to them. So that back and forth, might be a few days or so, depending on how much they have to do. But for me, it took about a week, so to draft it up and then go back and forth. So it was a lot faster than I thought it would be.
And maybe also one way to think about that is that the reception of it is also ephemeral or short term. You have an op-ed, get it out there. Most likely people are not talking about that op-ed 2 or 3 days later. unless it's of, really significant, it gets amplified because it's part of an ongoing conversation. So think about that. You're saying something you don't necessarily choose with a great deal of deliberation, a great deal of thought, every single utterance out of your mouth, but yet it's part of a conversation. And I think an op-ed is a vehicle to do that. I do think one of the things that is important to communicate in an op-ed as an academic is some version of expertise, or at least knowledge, as this is necessarily your opinion, unless you want to present it only as your personal opinion, which is a strategy. But if you're doing so from the basis of your disciplinary training, then some version of that, but also that to give some examples which speak to what your disciplinary expertise is and what your familiarity is, but also an example, that would not necessarily only be legible to those people who already know that topic. And to either through use of analogies or an element that is familiar to your research, but also familiar to others in another way, to use that as something. And I'll give you an example. I participated in a group op-ed, which was done by the UC Social Science Dean. So we're trying to get published in Cal Matters about this new state climate resilience fund. And so we used as an example the ways in which each of our campuses are at the forefront of various kinds of climactic disasters, fires, floods, exactly, so to talk about the research that we're doing there, but also to talk about, we're familiar that many UC campuses are impacted by wildfires. Some might be impacted by an earthquake or by a flood, or in our case, extreme heat. And so we went through both our position of making a kind of a case, but also using examples which I had some familiarity with, that other people could also, who were not at the campus, say, oh yeah, that's it. That's an important thing as well.
I think that's a great point. There are lots of topics. I mean, sometimes, they just come up from one day to another, and then there's maybe not enough time to prepare, but there are a lot of topics or issues happening around the country that you can really think about. You say, I'm an expert here. I have the time. There's an anniversary coming up. There's a certain month coming up, a celebration. You can tie those op-eds into that conversation at that particular time. Our office can help you, or if you have direct contacts with media, you can contact with them directly. But there are a lot of those opportunities. But as Daryle said, they come and go very quickly. So there is that opportunity to plug in your voice. And then there's also other opportunities where you can look at and think, I have a little bit of time. I'm gonna try to pitch this right now because something will come up, and it's important for me to step up and have my voice included in this national conversation, hopefully. We have another question. Sometimes questions that come from media sometimes the questions that the media ask don't exactly fit into your areas of expertise, or is tangentially related. Can you talk about the challenges of talking about topics that you may not be a total expert at, and especially if you're a younger professor?
I'm happy to speak to that. It's just one experience, but my sort of strategy on that front has shifted a lot in my career. So in the early days, certainly in graduate school, on a rare occasion, anyone cared what I had to say. But then as a early professor, I would take anything I thought I had any chance at commenting on that the media folks sent my way. It was all just kind of exciting and new, and it was fun to see my name in Friends or on the radio. And and I also felt like I know more than the average human about most things related to social psychology. In my case, I can probably speak to a lot more than just my own research. At some point, it wasn't a big decision I made, but I just started finding that to be a little challenging, probably in the same way that the question asker means. Like I found myself having to stretch so far beyond my expertise and feeling like, gosh, you really should be talking to this other person who really could speak to that more fully. And so maybe much to the media office's chagrin, in the last probably 10 years at this point, I really only talk about like my research. Like if the person, who wants to talk to me is like, I want to talk about waiting, I want to talk about worry or patience now, or whatever I'm studying, I'm really excited to talk. And I otherwise kind of pass them by because I just found it was, I think I was wasting people's time sometimes. And it was also not nearly as satisfying to become known for something that wasn't really my thing.
Anybody else want to speak about? We do have a lot of those media requests, and you feel like, oh, I'm not fully the expert there. I don't know if I can take this question or this interview. Anybody else has felt? I know I've emailed a few of you and said, hey, the reporter's asking for this, and the response is, I don't feel completely comfortable with taking this interview. And then there are other times that email makes it a little bit difficult, right? You're not face to face, and so the reporter was asking one question, but because they weren't maybe fully knowledgeable about your expertise, they didn't ask the right question. But anybody else has taken any interviews where you feel like the questions weren't asked, and maybe if you turned it around, like did you pivot? And that's also a strategy, right? You ask a question and you can always say, that's a great question, but my expertise is here, right? And you pivot that question. If Daryle and Rachel are nodding, if you can share that.
That's a good point. I forgot I had done that. I was like, I can't talk about Alzheimer's disease, but I can talk a lot about learning new stuff, which may or may not, right? And then they're like, oh yeah, we're interested in that. So usually I've found that writers will have like certain kind of categories of things they write about. And so if they don't need you for one particular article, they can contact you again for another one. But yeah, I have definitely pivoted their article for them sometimes for my benefit.
And if I can plug in, the reality now is that that's a smart strategy, right? Because when I was a reporter, I don't know, maybe some 20 years ago when I started as a young reporter, we had reporters who were experts, just like you, in many different areas, right? And we all know what has happened to the journalism world, right? It's gone from this to this very narrow. So now you have a reporter who used to just focus on science writing, just used to focus on elementary school education, City Hall. Now they're covering 5, 6, 7 topics. Beats is what we call them, right? So it's difficult sometimes for a reporter to say, hey, you talk to this psychology professor, talk about politics, and maybe their expertise hasn't really been on there. So this is really when your expertise comes into play, right? That's a great question, but here's what I can speak on, and sort of redirect them, because it just might be that sadly they're covering 7 beats and they didn't have enough time to do the in-depth research that was required for that one topic. Let's see, I have one question being asked. Do you write press releases for Spanish language media? We don't write, well, I haven't written specifically in Spanish, but have I translated? Yes, I am am I the bilingual officer here, John, or one of the bilingual officers?
I
and so
believe you are, although I guess Julia, we have
we do have our student writer. We have 2 people on the team now, so we can definitely take actually one of a graduate student, his music research in Peru. I wrote it all in English, and then Spanish language, the LA Times in Espanol asked for the press release to be in Spanish, so I did translate that for them. So I did do that, and I have, should I say or not say, Shaun, that we have been in conversation about having our experts who are Spanish speakers working on short videos to sort of disseminate their expertise that way as well. And so we're just in the conversation and very early planning stages, but that's always, the intention, again, as Rachel said, is, to have more of our experts out there in the media, English, Spanish, I don't know, Chinese, whatever we can get them out, because the impact is important at all levels. And so, yes, good question. So I can definitely work with you on that. We have another question. Can you discuss whether the university has plans to develop protocols and strategies to protect faculty who attract threats, doxing, and harmful attention from within and beyond the campus as a result of statements they make to media on contentious issues?
Do you have the rundown, Sandra, of that? I don't have it in front of me, of the upcoming seminar about that with Center for Ideas?
We do. We have that is for April, I believe, because that's a great question. And how to deal with trolls, right? That is part of our one of the webinars that we have.
And
it's
so
an
we'll definitely address as part of that what the university's role in that is, and what kind of support you can get. But we're trying to make sure, I want to make sure we have a very practical answer for you as opposed to just a discussion about it. I'd really like you to emerge from that with tools and with knowledge about the plan of action when this happens.
Yes, absolutely. We will be sending out those registration links, and hopefully people can, participate, because it definitely is important to have our faculty members be able to speak and write and not feel like they can't, because of those threats. We are, oh goodness, we are running out of time. It is 1:30. That happened really, really quick. Thank you, everybody. I think I might have missed maybe one question in there. So sorry if I did, but we want to respect everybody's time and really appreciate everybody's participation in this webinar. Like I said, this is one of 4 webinars. This is we will be sending out more links and more information. Next one is on February 13th, and the topic is who is an expert? And the answer is you. You are the expert. We have 3 journalists coming from CBS, New York Times, and LAist who will be joining us to discuss who is an expert and what they're looking you as the expert when they're interviewing you. Hopefully we could give you also a little bit of tips on how to prepare for those interviews and sort of just join that conversation. And with that, I think, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Shaun, Kate, Daryle, and Rachel. I really appreciate your time and sharing your experiences and your expertise with us. Bye, everybody. Until next time.
Everybody.
Bye. Bye.